Recently, I did a video on carrier route reports and demographics and how they might affect determining your pricing structure for your club. And one of the things that I mentioned in that video is something called a natural boundary or a natural barrier. And I've gotten a couple questions about that since then, and it just happened with a new club that I'm working with in Rhode Island. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to cover this subject to see if you have any of these natural barriers or boundaries in your area when you're determining your demographics and pricing structure. So a natural barrier is something that will stop a prospect or a member from coming to your area. It may fit within your radius of your demographic, but something psychologically is making them stop, or environmentally is making them stop. So Manhattan would be an obvious one. If you had Manhattan and you have bodies of water, you run a radius, this area, New Jersey, and this area over here, New Jersey, they would come into your demographic, but people are not going to cross these bodies of water in order to come to that club in Manhattan. In Manhattan might not be the best example because in a city like that we would be doing a block radius anyways rather than a mile radius, but the concept applies. So there's lots of areas like this that would affect whether somebody would come to your area. In Nashville, for example, there's a big river that runs through, and people will not cross that river in order to come to a health club. They'll go downtown to go shopping or go see the sights or maybe take a hockey game in, but they're not going to cross those boundaries in order to come to a health club. Rhode Island is the example that we're talking about right now. So in her particular case, she has kind of a little peninsula, and the club is right here. She has small bodies of water, very small bodies of water, and her 5-mile radius encompasses all of this. People are not going to travel over this body of water in order to come to that health club. This area right here is a 1-mile radius. So people in her particular area are only going to go this way and they're going to go this way. Even though her 3-mile comes here and then her 5-mile comes here, people are not going to cross these bodies of water in order to come to that club. So her radius is actually very small because of these natural barriers in her area. So if somebody were to come in that didn't know the area, didn't know how people travel to this area, they might say they have X number of people and these X number of people have this income level. We have enough people to support the club in this area. But if you look at those demographics very carefully, you realize that these two bodies of water are natural barriers and people will not cross over those bodies of water to come to this club. So you have to look at these demographics very carefully. Another example is I had a client for years and years in Indiana, and he had a major thoroughfare coming through his area and his club was right on that. Well, all the high income people were up here and people would travel down, and he had a pretty big following. He had a large membership base at one time. Well, then they started doing construction, and that construction gradually started down this road, and it lasted about 2 or 3 years. And all of those high-income people just started to avoid this area because the traffic was so congested. The people down here, there weren't enough of them, and there weren't enough of them in the income level that he needed to support the club. So gradually his club started to die because all of the people that were in his demographic just wouldn't travel through this. So this traffic, this construction zone would be a natural barrier. And unfortunately for him, it lasted so long that the club eventually didn't make it. So sometimes a natural barrier isn't a environmental body of water or something like that. Sometimes it's man-made and there's nothing you can do about it. If you have a functional training club or a CrossFit or a hybrid type club, people will be more likely to cross a natural barrier if your reputation is big enough in the community, but it still is a little bit dangerous. Another scenario that sometimes comes into play is the go-to versus the go-away area. Meaning that are people in your demographic more likely to go to your area of town or go away from your area of town? Recently, I had an old friend that looked me up on Facebook that I did a demographic study for him over 12 years ago. And he popped up, and this was a great example because he lives in a small town and he was building a new club. And you had a main street, which was actually very nice. But it was, like most mid-America towns, not as popular as it used to be. You had an area over here that once was the thriving shopping area. And way outside of town, they were building all the new stuff. The Best Buys, the Home Depots, the new outdoor trendy shopping plazas, things like that. So once that started to happen, people started to go naturally to this area. They were no longer going to this area. So out of habit, people generally migrate to the area that they are used to going to. They'll go, okay, well, I've got to go to the store. I've got to go to the shopping center. I've got to go get groceries. And their mind is naturally taking them in this direction because that's the habit that they've created based on where the new demographics are being built. So if you're building a club down here on this way and people's habits are now bringing them this way, you're going to have a harder time developing that club, even if your radius encompasses that area. Because people were more likely to go the direction that they normally go in their daily lives. So you could have a demographic, or you could have a club that's in that 5-mile radius, and people generally will go to that 5-mile radius, but because people are used to going the completely opposite direction, they're not as likely to go there. They will choose a club over here that's the same distance away because generally that's the way they're used to going. Plus, they might have other stuff that they naturally go to now in that area, like getting groceries and stuff like that, so it's on the way. So you have the habit of going that direction, and then you have the fact that they're now going in this direction to do their errands. So that makes it tougher also. So the GoTo versus GoAway is more prevalent in a smaller, older community, but it does happen, and it's something that we have to look at. Now, like we said earlier, if you're doing a CrossFit, a functional club, a hybrid club is not as big a deal as if it was a traditional club, because people will travel different directions if the reputation of the owner or the reputation of the club is large enough in order to attract those people. So if you're looking at your demographics right now in your existing club to determine whether your pricing structure is right for your community, or you're developing a new club, you have to look at these natural barriers in order to determine whether the demographics that you're doing in a radius are accurate, or you have to do more of a customized demographic report and weed out those areas that may not be within your demographic, even though they're within your radius.